of weaves around a little bit. It takes a journey up to New York and then back down around. And in East Brady, PA, 72 miles away, that's where our last lock-in dam is. And that only means that the last 72 miles of the Allegheny River are the only section of the river that is navigable by a barge or a larger vessel. I also mentioned that the Ohio and Allegheny rivers are sand and gravel based. Well, Pittsburgh's glass industry has that natural resource to thank. The first two glass factories opened up in the area in 1797, and we've had a glass industry ever since because the Allegheny and Ohio rivers are still dredged of its natural resources to be used in the manufacture of glass. We're about to go underneath our next bridge. This is the twin sister to the Fort Pitt, the Fort Duquesne Bridge. It has its own interesting history. The bridge was open to traffic in 1969. However, it was done in 1963. So what happened in those 6 years? Bureaucratic ineptitude and government red tape. It took the city 6 years to get the right-of-way to connect the bridge to the highway. That means the Fort Duquesne Bridge just kind of stopped 90 feet before it would connect to the other side, making it unusable. And locals nicknamed it the Bridge to Nowhere. And no one could drive on the bridge to nowhere, but one person tried. It was in 1964. It was very late at night, and a 21-year-old Pitt student somehow found himself on the Fort Duquesne Bridge. The barricades that were supposed to prevent this kind of thing from happening were mysteriously not in place that night. He was on the bridge and didn't realize it until he was suddenly very much off the bridge. Yes, he drove clean off the unfinished end. He was driving his aunt's station wagon. The car did a flip and it landed on the roof on the bank on the other side. A potentially horrible, fatal accident, but it wasn't. Not only did the young man survive, he was remarkably unhurt. He was able to crawl out from underneath that car and call a cab. And he was the only person to ever fly off the bridge to nowhere. A honor that he never quite lived down. Now I want to bring your attention to the right, to the river's edge. You see that beautiful mural that was painted in 2021 by local artist Camo Nesbitt. It's titled Black Flowers, and it contains 12 underrepresented black faces of Pittsburgh. There are some modern day Pittsburghers there. Wiz Khalifa is on the mural, as well as the actor Billy Porter, two Pittsburgh natives. But there are some folks from the past that were extremely influential, like Alma Speedfox. She was a civil rights icon in the city during the civil rights movement, and at one point she was the director of the NAACP. There's also another woman there named Mary Cardwell Dawson, who was a musician and a teacher and a singer, an opera singer, and she co-founded the National Negro Opera Company, which got its start in the Homewood neighborhood of Pittsburgh in a house in 1941. That house is still there, and it's currently being completely refurbished. At the end of the mural, if you look up, you can see those three identical silver buildings. That's Gateway Center. Gateway Center is home to KDKA, which is the nation's oldest commercial radio station. It was founded in 1920, and in its inaugural year, it had the first commercial radio broadcast, where they reported the results of the 1920 presidential election. If you were curious, that was Warren G. Harding. But moving on to something a little more recent, if you see this tan building that comes to a point with the Highmark logo on it, that's Fifth Avenue Place. That one opened in 1988. Apparently, that spire on the top indicates how tall the architect would have liked his building to be, but the city wouldn't let him. When he presented the plan to the city, they said, where that skyscraper is going, you gotta make it shorter. And he was forced to acquiesce. But there's a reason the city set that limitation. If you notice, starting at the point and moving back, the buildings gradually get taller the further back you go. That is one of the big reasons why Pittsburgh has such a beautiful skyline. We don't have any enormous skyscrapers that obstruct the view, which is why, especially if you're looking on the top of Mount Washington, the city is extra pretty. Now, we're currently going underneath the first of the three sister bridges. This one might drip on you. It's currently being worked on, just FYI. These are three self-anchored suspension bridges. All three were built in the 1920s, and these days, all three are named after notable Pittsburghers. The one we just sailed underneath is the Roberto Clemente Bridge. Clemente was a Puerto Rican baseball player who played right field for the Pirates from 1955 until 1972. He would have probably played longer with the Pirates. However, he tragically lost his life in a plane crash in 72. He was on that plane because he was trying to personally deliver aid to earthquake victims in Nicaragua. He was a great philanthropist, a very conscientious man who was involved in his local community as well as the Latin American community. And Pittsburgh will never, ever forget Roberto Clemente. Neither will Major League Baseball. The year after he passed away, they renamed their Commissioner Award to the Roberto Clemente Award. It's issued once a year to a single player that exemplifies outstanding sportsmanship and community engagement. Now, this middle sister is named after Andy Warhol, a name that probably needs no introduction. It's, of course, the world-famous pop artist who made his biggest splash in New York City in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. But he got his start right here in Pittsburgh. He grew up here with his family. Back then, he was known as Andy Warhola, kind of a sickly, shy kid who stayed home from school a lot, but he had a strong artistic streak that was heavily encouraged by his mother, Julia. She helped him develop his artistic skills, and he took those artistic skills and got out of Pittsburgh and went to New York. But that's okay, because Pittsburgh is also home to the Andy Warhol Museum, the most comprehensive museum that's dedicated to a single artist. This final bridge is dedicated to Rachel Carson. Carson was a marine biologist and environmentalist who in 1962 wrote the book Silent Spring, which discussed the dangers of DDT and the negative effect that chemical has on wildlife. It was understood that Silent Spring, as well as Carson's other writings, have generally spearheaded the modern environmentalist movement. Now that we're clear of the bridges, I want to bring your attention up to the skyline. See the dark building that says UPMC on it? Well, that is the U.S. Steel building. It opened in 1970. It has that dark look because it was made with a material called Core 10 steel. What this steel does is it's supposed to rust gradually over time, and the rust coats the building and protects it from the elements. However, in 1970, when it opened, some people say it might have been from acid rain, but either way, every time it rained, the building would bleed rust into the sidewalks below. Sometimes it would just rain rust onto any unfortunate pedestrian below. A bit of a bumpy start. The city had to spend tens of thousands of dollars to now replace the ruined sidewalks. But fortunately, the U.S. Steel building doesn't bleed rust anymore. And at 64 stories tall, it is still the tallest building we have in the city. But now from the tallest building to the one with the largest footprint. Right here on the river's edge on the right, we have the David L. Lawrence Convention Center. It consumes 3 city blocks, and when it opened in 2006, it was the largest green building in the world. It has a gold LEED certification. It has a skateboard ramp-shaped roof that is covered in solar panels. And you see all those floor-to-ceiling windows bring in a ton of natural light. Those are just 2 of many energy-efficient technologies that it employs. And then, oh look, another bridge. We're about to go underneath the Fort Wayne Railroad Bridge now, a bridge that is over 100 years older than the Convention Center. It opened in 1904 as a double-decker railroad bridge, and it's still in use today, but only the top deck is still used. If you notice the piers, the stone on the top of the pier is a different color than the ones on the bottom. That's because in 1918, this entire bridge was raised 16 feet to accommodate river traffic. It's a good thing they did, because if you notice how short the bridge was originally, there's no way larger vessels would have made it underneath this bridge, including the Queen. Now there's 2 more bridges here on the Allegheny I can point out for you. The first one's right ahead. It's the Veterans Bridge. It opened in 1988. Visually, probably the least impressive one we'll see today. But it's got its own interesting facts. For one, it's home to Interstate 579, a very important artery that connects Interstates 279 to 376. It's also called Crosstown Boulevard and is very heavily traveled. But it is just over 3 miles long, making it one of the shortest interstates in the country. If you notice the pier on the right-hand side, you'll be able to see it as we make our turn. On the right-hand side, it says 20, 30, 40. That's an indicator for the captain. If the river levels start to raise really high, The captain can take a look at those numbers and know if it's safe to navigate their vessel underneath. However, the Fort Wayne Bridge and the 16th Street Bridge are both shorter than the Veterans Bridge. So if you can make it underneath them, you're going to probably be all right. And I just mentioned it, this is the last bridge we can discuss on the Allegheny. It is the 16th Street Bridge. It opened in 1923, but in 2013, it was dedicated to the Pulitzer Prize-winning author and historian David McCullough. If you've seen any American history documentaries in the 1990s, chances are you might have seen him on it as a talking head. He was in a lot of documentaries, very prolific author. Now you might notice something familiar about this bridge. It's yellow. We went underneath a ton of yellow bridges. We are famous for them. This is why we have our yellow bridges. If you recall, when we were back at the point, I mentioned that downtown Pittsburgh's triangular shape is nicknamed the Golden Triangle. That nickname references the fact that way back in the day, in the early 20th century, that's where all of Pittsburgh's banks were located. That's where all the gold was. And in the 1980s, the city decided to make that a little more visually apparent. They decided to paint all of their older bridges this beautiful shade of yellow, which its name is Aztec Gold. And that's why we have our yellow bridges. And because this is, after all, the city of black and gold, it fits right in, and we absolutely adore them. The reason why Pittsburgh is the city of black and gold, and why you see it everywhere, is because of our sports teams, obviously. But the reason why they are black and gold, those two colors were heavily featured in William Pitt's family coat of arms. That's where black and gold came from, originally. And the Great Seal of the City of Pittsburgh, that design, took a version of William Pitt's crest, as well as other design elements. And then one sports team became black and gold, and then another, and another, and another, and now they're all black and gold, and we won't have it any other way. At this point in the tour, folks, I usually take just about a 5-minute break to give you a chance to stand up, stretch your legs, and not miss anything. I wouldn't want you to miss the bar. This is, after all, the happy hour tour. So we've got Adrian on the first deck, we've got Sean on the second deck. They've both got snacks. Sean's got a little more snacks, but they both have the happy hour cocktails, which is a Golden Anchor lemonade. I think I heard the Jolly Roger's the other one. They'd be more than happy to tell you about it. So go ahead, take a break. That's what I'm going to do. I'll be back in 5 minutes.